Hi, everybody.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have a newcomer into the temple, the man behind the galaxy under construction known as Jump Rangers, and the man who's been subject to a few bad puns because of his name, Tennyson Stead, which I swear to God, 50 years ago that could have been a pulp detective name.
Absolutely.
How you doing
Absolutely.
tonight?
It's good for branding. It's good for branding, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to get into the nitty gritty of game development.
Yep. So, one of the traditions around here over the last 10 years has been opening with the humble beginnings. So, I'd like you to walk me through your first introduction to role-playing games and what made it stick.
Okay. Well, I went to boarding school in Andover, Massachusetts, and like I think most role players, I didn't have a lot of friends, and the people that sort of saw me as an interesting person first and foremost was the theater community there. And I started just helping out around the theater. I started running spotlight for shows and helping with lighting hangs and that kind of thing. It's also how I got into show business. And it wasn't long before I started hearing about everybody's fascination with Vampire the Masquerade. I was also surrounded by a bunch of Star Wars dorks. So I was getting the idea that this tabletop role-playing thing was something that my friends were doing and that people were into. I convinced someone to start running a West End Star Wars game so I could play that. And I made some lifelong friends in that game. And then after a while, I got invited into a werewolf tabletop game that was happening with a bunch of people that I knew from the theater. And the storyteller who was running that game was somebody who kind of swallowed the party line of White Wolf at that time, hook, line, and sinker. He was somebody who was very, very passionate about getting great performances out of people who weren't necessarily actors and who didn't necessarily think of themselves as performers, and challenging them to become, um, moment to moment icons in their own lives. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Really, like, find those performance beats that help them define their relationships with other people and their reputation and the things that they thought were cool. And a couple of things happened for me in that space. And we didn't just play Werewolf the Masquerade. We played some Mage.
Wait, Werewolf the Masquerade?
I mean, Werewolf the Apocalypse. But we also played some Vampire. We also played some Mage. We played plenty of Dungeons and Dragons sessions, but Werewolf was always the focus. And I learned that I loved directing actors. I learned that creating your own worlds was something that people did professionally and not just George Lucas. I learned all kinds of things in that space. I learned how the people that I knew on an everyday basis had these amazing performances inside them, and how to get them to deliver those performances. I also learned a lot of things I didn't want to carry on, with my career. I learned how abusive geek culture can be at times. I learned how we tend to trivialize people's trauma for fun. All kinds of things. But it was very formative. And in college, I started writing my first tabletop role-playing game, which was a hard science fiction time travel game about an organization of time commandos and scientists and spies and so on and so forth, who are trying to change and shape history to prevent humanity's own self-destruction. So they're sort of fighting people's own propensity for short-term thinking and selfishness and everything else, and trying to guide history forward mission by mission at least one more minute into the future. And that's kind of where things started for Jump Rangers. At some point, I'm going to go back to Restoration. It's a very cool concept, and there's a lot of really good ideas in there. There's a lot that's dated. There's a lot that I'm not as happy with now that I've created what I consider to be a very elegant gaming system. There's a lot that I'd like to do differently with Restoration.
Yeah.
But that'll happen in time.
An artist is their own worst critic.
Yeah, it's true, but that game's very crunchy and not in the happy. And it's crunchy. I'll put it to you this way, Mildred. It's crunchy in a way that pleases the wrong people.
What?
Does that make sense?
So it's crunchy in the way that the people who still enjoy the stuff that came out of Fantasy Games Unlimited is crunchy, or Phoenix Command is crunchy.
It's annoying, crunchy, and it gives people power over each other in ways that I don't like. It's the kind of crunchy, annoying stuff that gives people power trips, and that we don't need that. We don't need that in the game.
You did say that one of the games you started out with was Mage, which is, as I've often joked, is a perfectly balanced game with no exploits whatsoever.
You know what? Yes and no, okay? I think that a lot of those kinds of exploits exist in the game that I'm working on now, but the cool thing about Mage is that it's literally built, and how you break it is the gameplay. How you break the gaming system is a part of the gameplay. So, managing your spheres and learning what you can do with certain spheres is a question. As long as you have a storyteller who's really up for exploration and is embracing the kind of conceptual nature of Mage. If you have a storyteller who's not afraid about kind of the Greek philosophy of it all, then you wind up with a situation where any particular sphere is overpowered as long as you spin it in the right way. And I was my best Mage game was in more recent years. It was run by Dan Haggerty, who's my composer and best friend. We had a bunch of actors that we are friends with playing in the game with me, and everybody was very committed to kind of, again, their own tradition and breaking the game in a way that made sense for them. So it kind of became a competition over who could run roughshod over reality without getting caught most effectively. And that was so much fun. And that's Mage at its finest. It's actually, I think, super elegant when but you need a bunch of players, and you need a storyteller who's not trapped in, it isn't Call of Cthulhu. You can't be counting beans hard in Mage, I think.
Yeah. Although whenever it comes to that, I've always had the running gag of taking a bunch of Call of Cthulhu players and putting them in a session of, say, Paranoia.
Yeah.
And then asking them, "Are you unhappy with this choice of game? Unhappiness is treason. Treason is punishable by death."
Yeah. I actually have gotten to know one of the writers of Paranoia over the course of the last several years online. There's a guy named David Avalone who wrote some supplements for the game. It's I'll put it to you this way: the people who made that game are exactly who you think they are. They're exactly the kind of nerd you think they are, 100%. And it's kind of delightful to see.
Which I'm perfectly fine with. My only approach on that matter has always been to find new and interesting ways to live to live rent free in my players' heads. Some cases it's to prevent people from trying to cheat. The most famous case of that is if you get caught cheating, you have to drink a bottle of baking soda.
Oh, But that's only if you get caught, and that's part of the point of paranoia, right?
Yeah,
Is that
well, I do it in general, not just with paranoia. Because some
oh,
people
I
have
see.
tried to fudge dice rolls, thinking I wouldn't notice when, of course, I do. Uh,
Yeah,
because I know just as many tricks that as they do,
of course.
and a bottle of baking soda is like what would happen if you mix club soda with bacon grease. It's absolutely disgusting, and that's the point.
Yep.
Make the
Yep.
punishment so much worse than the crime that nobody's willing to test their luck.
I see. I
But,
see.
uh,
I'm not as to me, like, as a storyteller,
mhm,
if I am typically I play with people who are just as excited to find out what happens as anything else. So I think the
mhm,
players I play with are disinclined to cheat in general. But if someone felt the need, if someone felt like they if someone felt threatened by the story on a personal level where they felt like their investment in the game was in jeopardy and they needed to protect it, I wouldn't want to catch them. I wouldn't want like I would just want to give them the space and accept it for what it is, and hopefully, through that they'll become a little bit
yeah.
more trusting and a
And
little bit more stable.
to be honest, I haven't used that gag as much as people think. I've only had to
Hmm.
use it 4 times because the presence of it is enough to make people not want not want to try
The
it.
threat of the bacon soda is always hanging over people's heads.
Well, it's either baking soda or the pain glass, which is a shot glass filled with water, salt, sea salt, pepper, black um black pepper, and about 3 or 4 different hot sauces.
I see. I
Uh,
see.
some people, when the one chip challenge was a thing, I used that as a substitute. Because one of my dear friends who's at my table is always talking about stuff not being spicy enough. So,
Uh-huh.
so I'm like, oh, all right, you think this isn't all that spicy? Oh, okay, let's see how far that can go.
Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
he's tried a few of those experiments and said, "Oh, that's not that bad." And I just tell him, wait about 20 minutes, then we'll see.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
But
We'll leave it there.
but with Jump Rangers, I think one of the first things that I'd want to go into with it is what its Appendix N would be if you're familiar with that concept.
No.
So Appendix N was a section in early editions of D&D, and it's since become a kind of shorthand for inspirational or reference material in other media for a
Oh, I
given
see.
game.
Okay.
Like the
Yes. Yes.
recommended material thing that's in the first chapter of a lot of those White Wolf books. It's the same principle.
I would say that in a lot of ways, Jump Rangers is a distillation of science fiction memes that everybody is already familiar with. So I don't think anybody's going to be playing Jump Rangers who doesn't have some passing familiarity with science fiction as a genre. And if they did, that would be kind of wonderful to see them discover these things through the
Yeah.
world of Jump Rangers to begin with. But, in general, I would say Jump Rangers is a Saturday morning cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've watched a lot of action or science fiction animated content, you probably have a pretty good idea of what is happening in Jump Rangers.
Mm-hmm.
Voltron is certainly an inspiration. Transformers is certainly an inspiration. G.I. Joe is certainly an inspiration. StarCraft is a big visual inspiration for the project. Star Wars is obviously a huge inspiration. But at the end of the day, what makes Jump Rangers interesting and what makes it unique is the fact that you're seeing everything through the eyes of the kids to begin with. So, for example, we have space whales in Jump Rangers, and some of these space whales have been colonized by people who are looking for ways to travel between the stars a little bit more easily. So they've built these giant kind of oil derrick style space stations in the gullets of these whales, and sure enough, there's spacecraft coming and going. And when you look at it, you go, "Oh, that's Pinocchio," but it's very much through this very industrial and survivalist lens visually speaking. So it's got a sense of wonder to it, but it pulls from all these different areas. In the world of Jump Rangers, we have an empire of space dinosaurs. We have giant telepathic Tyrannosaurus Rexes and an army of Undersaurs at their telepathic command, conquering the galaxy. And they conquered Earth in 2058, and people survived by sneaking aboard these spaceships and kind of living behind the walls, borrower style, like the pests of the galaxy that we are. And we spread out over the next 300 years until we had colonized huge parts of their empire. And in doing so, we found out that they're at war with a race of giant robots. So now we're spreading out into loom space and robot space, and there's other big things going on. You look at a giant dinosaur with battle armor, and it's not the first time you've seen that. You look at a giant robot stomping across the horizon of a planet. It's not the first time you've seen that. We have space mice. There are space mice out there. We have intelligent planets. There are intelligent planets out there. But what makes it Jump Rangers is the fact that you are between the ages of 5 and 18. And you've got this blaster, and you're trying to find a place for humanity in all of this. So, in a lot of ways, Jump Rangers has kind of been an opportunity to re-engage a lot of the things that I have thought were cool over the years, but that I didn't necessarily have a place for. You know what I mean? In terms of world building, in terms of giving it a life of its own, in terms of using it as a creative tool. I didn't have a place for space mice, but my wife loves mice, and I was like, I should put space mice in Jump.
So a couple observations. One of them is, as soon as you mentioned space mice, I wanted to ask if they're from Mars, because I had to get that joke out of my system.
No, they're not. No,
but the other thing is there were two films that part of me was wondering if it was on some level of an influence.
Okay.
And one of them technically isn't science fiction, but there's a similar energy.
Okay.
And that is The Goonies and The Last Starfighter.
Oh, for sure. And along those lines, I would also argue that, any story where young people are put in charge of their own destinies. Super 8 is relevant to what's going on with Jump Rangers. On some level, I would argue the Golden Compass is relevant. I think any situation where you're allowing a child to drive the narrative. Harry Potter. I was walking. Jump Rangers is something that happened when I was walking out of a movie theater. I was working in film finance. I had just seen Prisoner of Azkaban, and it all started because, from a screenwriting standpoint, I was very frustrated. Good acting is about taking action as opposed to reaction, and the problem with Harry Potter at that point, as a film franchise, had been growing. Characters, writing for actors is all about giving the actors something to do. In other words, great stories on the stage and screen are about the efforts of our characters to achieve overwhelmingly challenging goals. We give the kids the wands in Harry Potter, but we don't give them the authority. There's always somebody telling them what to do. And in a lot of ways, the Harry Potter, and this works from a novelistic standpoint and a literature standpoint, but the world of Harry Potter is about these kids carrying out essentially the storytelling of Dumbledore and these other adults who have these problems that they're not really dealing with. And these adults kind of give these kids bite-sized missions and things to undertake and problems to solve along the way, or some great evil pops up that needs to be addressed, but it's never about the goals of the kids themselves. And these kids have all this power, but they have this very narrow frame through which to exercise it, and that frame is constantly being provided by other characters. And I just wanted the story where kids are the ones calling the shots. I wanted a kid coming out of a forested area and some weary-looking adult being like, who's been waiting for this kid to show up, being like, oh, thank God you're here. Like, here's the situation. What can we do? And the kid being the one who's like, well, here are the options. Here's what I see. And to have that trust. And on the flip side, I'm just not that much of a fantasy nerd. Yeah. So for me, I saw that problem and I was like, okay, but can we do blasters instead of wands? You know what I mean? let's do something else. Let's do something else. So
Yeah.
so
On one hand, I
jumping-
can see that. On the other hand, what is a phaser if not a wand with extra steps?
you shut your dirty mouth.
Your boos mean nothing. I've seen what makes you cheer.
Yeah, exactly.
Although, if I wanted to really twist the knife, I could bring up that portal generator in Rick and Morty. How is that not okay?
I, believe it or not, have not seen Rick and Morty. I have a friend. I do a podcast myself of basically me and this other writer I know named Greg Schwartz. We sit down and we do the initial work of adapting video games to the screen. And Greg is constantly referencing Rick and Morty, and I still haven't seen one episode. I realize just for the sake of that relationship.
For the sake of evening things out, I will note that my buddies have had this running gag of you can't avoid the Expanse forever, Monk.
Oh, yeah, the Expanse is good. The Expanse is good. I one of my own sort of gaming mainstays is Star Citizen, and man, the people in Star Citizen community love the Expanse. They adore it.
I can see it. Though I'm one of those people who in the Kirk Picard debate always answers with Cisco, so judge accordingly.
I loved Cisco up until the Savior story. I loved Cisco up until he's the savior of Bajor.
The whole Palray thing is the one criticism I will make because
it felt forced on the story. It didn't feel honest. It didn't feel real to me. But that's beside the point.
Yeah.
I love Cisco too. I am a hardcore Janeway fan because I feel like she got the short end of the stick and she came through swinging all the time. She had no reason to succeed. She pulled it together.
I've talked about Voyager elsewhere, and when it comes and ultimately I don't put any of it on Kate Mulgrew, although that remark she made about the audience not being able to accept a female captain I found a bit of a stretch. But I put more of it on the writers and the fact that according to that El Cars interview, it seemed that they were trying to do things like TOS, but the premise for what Voyager wasn't something that really fit TOS, so it's this constant tug of war.
I see that, but I also think they came through with some of the best episodes in Star Trek history. The Time of Troubles is one of the best things that they've ever done. And I will also say, when it comes to Kate Mulgrew, look, I've spent enough time in this Star Wars community to, without hesitation, say that the geek community has one foot firmly planted at all times in the worst bullying and the worst of misogyny and the worst of racism. I'm not it becomes a not all geeks conversation when we talk about this stuff, but the truth is, you don't need to look too far into our own past to see where geek content creators are constantly courting relationships. You don't need to look too far into Reddit to find it. You don't need to look far into the chat of any particular game. It's a mess.
Yeah.
And people can sit here and rationalize all they want about the quality of Captain Marvel versus the quality of Thor.
I've never done that. I know.
But you see what I'm saying? So you look back 15 years into the past, Kate Mulgrew probably had a pretty solid point. And I think that it's a fair indictment of geek culture, and anyone who says differently to me is hiding something. I thought
Wait, am I hiding something?
Well, we as a culture are, and we get caught up in it. Everybody gets caught up in it.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? What we're hiding is our dirty laundry. We're hiding certain assumptions, certain habits that we just don't want to have to address as a culture, and it's, I gotta say, it's a luxury we can't afford.
Well,
So when somebody like Kate Mulgrew or somebody like, I forget who played Rose Tico, you know what I'm saying? But when somebody steps up and says, this isn't right, I think that, especially if we happen to be male, if we happen to be white, it's a great opportunity to step back and say, why is she saying that? What's really going on here? And what am I not seeing?
Getting back on to things.
Yeah. Sure.
So one of the other major things that I get into a lot within these sorts of games, just in general, is what I like to call the Rome effect. We've all heard the phrase "all roads lead to Rome."
Sure.
And it's largely due to the fact that for about 30 or so years, and I can't say exactly when this change happened because it's like trying to determine when a new musical genre was formed. It's never just one thing. Mm-hmm. Like imagine trying to find where the shifting line between hard rock and metal was formed. You're gonna have an educated guess at best. Okay. But for the longest time, a lot of TTRPGs had operated under a collection of subsystems. This is largely a holdover from the wargaming scene of the 70s. Okay. And at some point, it changed to a unifying mechanic, like one particular type of dice roll that is the primary mechanic. And
I see.
Very out from under it.
I think that was White Wolf.
I'd like to say it was, but on the other hand, you've got stuff like say Traveler that also was starting to lean into that, or
West End Star Wars.
If there's anybody who I'd say might have been an early purveyor of it, probably Chaosium. Not through Call of Cthulhu, but through RuneQuest.
Okay. I don't know enough about RuneQuest to refute that, but yeah. I will say that it did happen. Certainly, I think in the 90s, that's when it happened.
It definitely accelerated in the 90s, especially after TSR had gone belly up due to a comedy of errors, to put it lightly.
Sure.
But it's a case where was that the cause, or was that an accelerant? But when it comes to jump ranges, what would you say is its role? Because it does look like you're using a dice pool approach.
We are using a dice pool. It is. We are looking for grand unifying systems in jump rangers. I want this game to be something that kids can pick up as young as 8, with relative ease, because that's the age of the characters, and I want kids to be able to, use the game as a system of play. I don't want it to be just for salty old bastards like ourselves. And I want kids also to have the opportunity to make their own. You understand what I'm saying? I want kids to have the things that tabletop role playing game provides at its best. So working that into the system has always been a goal. And I think you can't have that if there's if it's a puzzle. If it's a puzzle of a system, there's too many things to learn if that's the case. What I would rather have is, a second to learn, a lifetime to master. I would rather have that. And I will also say that play and gameplay in particular is all about developing habits. Right? When you're learning a sport, you turn that sport into muscle memory so that you can perform the basic tasks of the sport without needing to think about it. When you're learning chess, it takes a while for you to start to see 1 or 2 moves ahead, and then it takes a while for you to start seeing 3 or 4 moves ahead, and that's because you're building the habits of knowing where certain games lead and what certain positions on the table open up and so on and so forth. Your habits get deeper and deeper, and your conscious mind doesn't have to focus on quite as much when your unconscious mind is taking care of all that information. So gameplay, in that sense, and this is maybe deeper than you usually like to go, but it actually does build neural pathways. It changes how we think. It changes how we understand the world around us. And I want to be conscious and good and crafty and smart in how I handle that responsibility as a game designer. So I want to build gaming systems that help people change themselves for the better, that help them develop habits that are going to help them in other parts of their life, and that are also fun. And Mildred, how many of those can you come up with? That's tall order, man.
Yeah.
So I think do it right once, and then walk away.
But
the
point is that it looks that the approach you're taking is a success-based D8 pool.
Yes, that's correct.
One that's based on a aim high kind of successes. And it's funny that we brought up White Wolf, because there's some DNA of the storyteller system in that concept. Obviously,
there is. And at the same time, one of the things that I like about this game is that it does simplify things to a degree that I didn't realize they could be simplified when I sort of started down the road. So, like White Wolf, there's a target number that you're rolling for, and then you're looking for victories. That's what we sort of inherited from the White Wolf system and the D10 system. But assigning that target number is a question of literally making a list of the things your character has going for them, whether it's specialized knowledge that you have, or whether it's things that you are inherently, whether it's things you teach yourself or things you have cultivated inside yourself as virtues, right? We have virtues and we have training. So anytime I'm asking for a role, I ask you for the virtues and training that you have that apply to that role, and those are literally just words on the character sheet. I'm smart, I'm funny, I know about spaceships. You see what I'm saying? And so having those qualities apply to the role tells you what your target number is. However many qualities you have tells you what your target number is, and you roll against that number. Now, one of the things that this does that I appreciate is that it forces confrontation between the storyteller and the player. The player says, I'm good at this for these following reasons. And the storyteller has an opportunity to audit that logic. And these are conversations that players and storytellers have anyway. So I like the fact that it's gamified. And at that point you say, yep, you're right, or nope, this isn't. And you can sometimes have arguments with the players, but to me that's part of the fun. And what you get out of that system, functionally, is a player standing up for themselves. You see what I'm saying? I can do this for the following reasons. That statement is kind of intrinsic. You have to see your own value. You have to parse it in terms of what you're trying to achieve. And then you put it out there. And that's so thrilling to me. So that's the kind of the core, is that moment of like, I can do this, and let me tell you why.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit different than I've seen in any other. It's not that you're picking a stat. It's that you're saying, I have this and this and this and this going for me, and they apply. Don't tell me they don't. And maybe they do, and maybe they don't. You can argue it out, and even if someone disagrees with you, you can still try and make the role work, or you find a different way. But it's about you applying yourself consciously. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I think that's pretty cool. That's if kids came out of adolescence with that ability intact and strong, I think it'd be a lot harder to stop.
Mm-hmm. Now,
and that's exciting.
In that same vein, one of the things that I was curious about, since it's such a big part of the character that it has its own spot on the character sheet, is the firecracker.
Yeah. Well, you got to have gadgets,
Mhm.
and the firecracker is kind of a gadget king, right? I was always excited as a kid by attachable things and like transforming things.
Mhm.
I loved Judge Dredd's handgun. I loved any gun that could shoot a grappler. I loved. Remember the Centurions? Do you remember those toys? They were
Yeah.
characters with the plugs, and you would plug in the jetpacks and the weapons and this and that.
Mhm.
So I like the idea of interchangeable weaponry, kind of, and I always wanted the firecracker to be that.
Yeah.
So
I can get that. Even though some of them haven't stuck around for various reasons, there's certain types of modular firearms that have been experimented with by different countries over the years that I find fascinating, especially the XM project. I think it was done by, I think it was manufactured by H&K. Don't quote me on that. It was that really curved looking rifle that was experimented with that looked like it came out of a sci-fi movie.
Oh yeah, the corners, yeah.
And of course back on the PS2 there was a game called Extermination, which was a interesting little survival horror, though it had issues because it was a launch title, and well, the first thing you do sucks.
Okay.
But it had it took a very modular approach with a bunch of different attachments to this one rifle that was the only rifle that you'd have.
Yep.
But you could mess around with it. I think that's part of the reason why attachments became such a big deal in games like COD, or even Tarkov. Although some of the Tarkov players' attachments get a little out of hand.
Yes, they do.
You know,
I want to take a minute to address Mario because you got someone in chat telling me this game sounds really fun. Thank you for saying so.
Yeah.
Core book is downloadable for free. I say core book, but really it's a collection.
I did put the link in the description for the thing.
Please check it out, Mario. I think it is really fun. I think it is really fun. Also, if anybody wants to see the game played, there's an ongoing campaign that I've been running now for about a year on my YouTube. So it's youtube.com/@JumpRangers, called The Rookies, with two people who had never encountered the game before. And I've been consistently delighted with the solutions that these characters keep coming up with to the problems that we run into. So if you want to check out some gameplay, check out The Rookies on the YouTube channel. And if you want to just read it, please do. I welcome new players.
I will also admit that when I look at the approach you're taking with the firecracker, something else that ends up coming to mind is the motif of certain archer characters in fiction that have specialized arrows.
Yes.
You know, your green arrow, your Hawkeye, that kind of thing.
Absolutely, you are 100% correct. And I think that's and if I don't know how deeply you've delved into the supplementary material, there's a lot of it, but I think we have we coming up on 15 different kinds of firecracker attachments and missiles at this point. And you're absolutely right. That's that kind of creativity. I wanted the baseline Jump Ranger kit to have a sense of fun and a sense of whimsy and a sense of adventure and a sense of play to it. And you can build on that and expand on it. I mean, you can spend your points and you can go get gear from wherever you want to get gear, and there's all that stuff. But I wanted the entry-level Jump Ranger to have kind of a sense of possibility and a sense of, action, adventure, whimsy to it. Yes. So your Hawkeye is a great analogy. Absolutely, that was part of the equation.
I suppose I know you aren't big on fantasy, but another one that came to mind is the different types of arrows in the original Thief games.
Yes. Yep. You know what? Now that you've said that, I feel like I do have like blue arrows and those kinds of things. I do have different kinds of missiles along those lines. But now that you've said that, I feel like I should go spelunking and see
Mhm.
See what inspiration I can draw from some
Yeah,
of those
because
like goofy D&D spells and you know what I mean? Those kinds of things for sure. There's a lot of opportunity there.
I honestly, when it comes to that, I've a lot of the notes I take when it comes to specialized items, I will draw from a bunch of different resources. Sometimes Men in Black, sometimes James Bond. I've frequently given my players what I would consider very powerful but very unsafe equipment. And thank you for the follow jump. Um,
Oh, of course.
the big example is like the noisy cricket from Men in Black.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
it fires an extremely powerful shot, but you've got to deal with recoil because you're going to be on your ass for each shot.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
and that which one of my players thought he could outsmart it by leaning against a wall and then firing it. And I said, "You do realize that you're still getting knocked back. Now you just got crushed."
Yep. Yep. Well, I will say this: like the Jump Rangers is about kids, and one of the things that the West End Star Wars game always emphasized is that you are a hero. This game is about heroism.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't paranoia. I don't want to trick players into hurting themselves. This isn't quite that. It's more of now I freely acknowledge that sometimes players bite off more than they can chew, but I want the system and I want the rules to provide players with options for navigating those situations and for not just escaping them, but for maybe turning the tables on the impossible situation that they've created for themselves, as opposed to, well, now you've done it. You see what I'm saying? I don't want those, well, now you've done it moments. I want the player always to have the option, not necessarily successfully and not necessarily without some creativity, but to have the option to say, oh yeah, I have done it. Now watch this. You see what I'm saying? I want there to always be an opportunity for the players to turn the tables on not the storyteller but the adversaries that they've taken on it, and find a way to prevail. You know, if you go looking for in Jump Rangers, if you go looking for a thermal exhaust port right below the main port, there's a pretty good chance you're going to find one. Like,
Yeah, I know a lot of people. I know a lot of people have made jokes about the thermal exhaust port thing, but
yeah,
I think what people forget about that is the sole reason that wasn't paid all that much attention to is because the idea of firing at this one target that's 2 meters wide when you're going several hundred miles an hour in a ship was not a needle in a haystack, but a needle in a barge full of haystacks. And barges
sure, I
usually carry
acknowledge.
things by the ton.
Well, at the same time,
Mhm.
it is also, and I'm not saying it's not overwhelmingly challenging, but it is a convention of the writer. It is something that George Lucas invented a way for Luke to blow up the Death Star, and that's not great screenwriting, because that's not the actor solving the problem. That's not the character solving the problem. That's the writer solving the problem for the character and then offering them that solution with strings attached. Certainly, they have to jump through some hoops. But what you really want as a screenwriter, just pie in the sky, is for Luke to have to sit there and say, how do you blow this thing up? And then go find a way. Or if it can't be blown up, to find a solution to that problem. Because that's the really honest answer. You know what I mean? That's how, like, and maybe there's a way to blow it up and maybe there's not, but you want that way to be sort of procedural in the logic of the world. If we sort of all accept that power generators are explosive, if that's just something we all accept, then Luke has to get down to the power. But even that isn't necessarily the case. If you want something truly didactic, you know, then you have to, I mean, solving the problem of the Empire, as we all know, isn't something you can do with a pro. It takes a bigger movement, and it takes a bigger solution. And I think that as a writer, it's good to allow your characters to run face first into that fact. You don't want to sort of bake in a trapdoor solution.
Yeah.
You want there to be, and so on that level, once you create the trapdoor solution, it almost doesn't matter how many hoops, how fast you're moving, and so on and so forth. The size of the hole, all of that is semantic. What matters is that George Lucas created a solution for Luke and then handed it to him. And George Lucas isn't a character in the show, so. And then they retcon it, of course, with Rogue One and say, no, George Lucas didn't create that solution. He did. Mads Mikkelsen did. Like, well,
yeah. Though I
think we're,
But I will note this, since you mentioned the whole grappling hook thing and spelunking to see what you can draw from.
Yeah.
I will point out something obvious and bring up the 3D gear from Attack on Titan.
Yes. Which
essentially is a grappling hook with many extra steps because it's it's essentially on steroids.
Yes. Yep.
But
I think I want Jump Rangers to retain a sense of tactile.
Mm-hmm.
A tactile worldliness. I think in terms of like gearing up, I want there always to be that Saturday morning. I want there to be a little bit of Rambo. I want it to be
Rambo
physical.
First Blood or First Blood Part 2? Because there is
a
distinction.
First Blood Part 2, of course. But what I'm saying is I want there like strapping up and locking in and you've got your tools and you lay them out.
So Commando.
Yeah. And I think there's an element of that to it that I don't want to lose through. Like, one of the things that Star Citizen is famously struggling with is beams, if you've ever played the game. And that's a problem of game design, because you've got this world where everything can be moved, right? And you've got all these different players moving in all these different directions at once. And you can't just go around transporting characters so that they line up with certain animations. So if a character wants to pick something up, you want them to be able to pick it up from any direction, for example. And so if you're going to heal somebody or fix something, the great thing about beams is they are literally a line between the person and the thing they're interacting with, and it doesn't matter where they hit. You see what I'm saying? You don't have to put your hands on the handles, which means you don't need the character animation to step over 3 steps to the left and 1 in so that your arm lines up with the handle. You can just shoot the beam, which means everything in Star Citizen is beams. Healing is beams. Salvage is beams. Mining is beams. It's all beams. Mm-hmm. And one of the complaints that people have about the game, which is, and the devs freely acknowledge that it's a challenge, is that it breaks down the tactileness of it just a little bit. Because you're not putting your hands on things. It's all beams. And that's not a problem I intend to have with Jump Rangers. And I don't need to, because it's not an MMO. I'm not dealing with character animations.
You're also not jumping through like 3 or so different graphics engines.
Yeah, that's also true. At some point, hopefully, I'll have those problems. But I think even if Jump Rangers were to become something like an MMO, I think that it would never have the scope of gameplay of something. I wouldn't need mining in Jump Rangers. I'm not sending kids to the mines. You know what I mean? I think it's always going to be something a little bit more Nintendo than that, and it should be.
And that's why I referenced the Goonies earlier.
Yes, and you're right. You're right. Those kinds, the Explorers certainly is an influence. Which I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a Joe Dante movie that came out about the same time as the Goonies, about 3 kids that built a spaceship out of trash. Yep, all those films for sure, absolutely.
Yeah,
and the toys of the era too. Like we said, Centurions, obviously Dino Riders is an influence. It's the iconography of the time. In a new package, in a lot of ways.
Pretty much. And it's funny you brought up Transformers, because I ended up watching a bit of a mini doc on the insanity that led to the creation of Transformers and G.I. Joe. Namely, that they promoted a toy line by not promoting a toy line. By promoting the comic, and had Marvel involved. Though and I'm not saying this because of recent events, but there's a bit of an unwritten rule that wherever Marvel goes, drama follows. And some people are thinking, or you're referring to like modern Marvel. No, I'm referring to like the bankruptcy case, which managed to result in a 5-way fight that got the judge pissed off at everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even the people that the judge appointed to oversee the case were feuding with everyone else. That is how much of a trash fire it was. And when it came to doing G.I. Joe, there were a few people in Marvel at the time who were trying to undermine it before cooler heads prevailed. Because where Marvel goes, drama follows.
Yep.
And
well, it worked. It did work.
Yeah.
And having that focus on narrative, I think it frankly changed the culture.
And
you look
when it comes to G.I. Joe, Cobra wasn't the initial part of the plan. It was only put in there because one of the people overseeing was like, who are they up against? They can't just be marching around the base all day.
Right.
It took someone else to point that out for Cobra to become a thing, and the lessons from G.I. Joe played a factor in the creation of Transformers. And in fact, I remember hearing that one of the writers involved was a little bit upset that things had to be limited just because of the sheer amount of expansive material they were writing for what was ultimately a toy. And I think the fact that a lot of that was delved into when it came to the various comics, whether it be Marvel or IDW or whoever has it these days, further demonstrates that.
Yeah, it does. And it also influenced how toys were launched going forward. You look at the sort of next generation, like Starcom and Thundercats and these kinds of things. There was a whole Captain Power. There was a Hollywood grabs onto procedural success and doesn't let go. Once somebody does something well, everyone wants to do it exactly that way.
So in the process, when you do that, it's possible to miss the point.
That's exactly right. You don't necessarily focus on the quality of the craft as much. You're just focusing on the actual procedural elements that made it successful and following it like a blueprint. Especially if you don't understand, for example, what makes a comic book good. If you don't have those fundamentals in your talent pool, and if you're not relying on those people to kind of guide the ship, it can't be as successful. And that's a problem that the entertainment industry is constantly relearning.
Yeah.
To this day,
earlier today I was doing the Geek Watch podcast, and we talked about the journey that Hello Games has had regarding No Man's Sky.
Yeah.
And one of the things I brought up is that a lot of people ended up taking the wrong lessons from both of that and Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn.
Yeah.
Because they think, well, if those projects were able to make something of a comeback, then so can we. Ignoring the fact that they were able to make that comeback because of the fact that they took their lumps, essentially.
Yes, and also because of the fact that they had built so much goodwill prior to taking those lumps. Like the Hello Games, that I think it was Gamescom demonstration that they put on just blew people's minds, and everyone was so enthusiastic, and they had so much support and so much goodwill. So when the game came out and it wasn't what everybody was expecting, I think people were willing to sort of give them the benefit of the doubt, even though there was a bunch of bad press, and follow the process. And when it comes to Final Fantasy, nobody can deny the impact of the franchise, and I think it's a similar situation where everyone was like, well, this sucks, but it's Final Fantasy, so let's give them some breathing room. And you can't you're never going to find an Ubisoft title that can do that. You're just not. So it and especially given how exploitative AAA gaming is getting,
and
it's gonna be
I had warned for the longest time that what when it comes to that sort of thing, what goes around comes around.
Yeah.
So, and in the process, I had a whole lot of people saying that I was being a negative Nancy on the matter. Fast forward to these days, where the investors for that company are in panic mode, and once again I end up having the last laugh.
I see.
It's, for me, it's a case of just wait, be patient. These the
One of the things that I've so one of the things that informs me in terms of how I approach the games industry is Star Citizen. Um, I I when I first started, sort of like I back in 2013, I suffered a traumatic brain injury. I was hit in the head with a set, and there were a lot of things I couldn't do for a very long time. And so I was looking for ways to sort of engage community and build community and keep myself occupied without those tools. And Star Citizen caught my eye, but it wasn't ready to play, and so I fell into the Blizzard community for quite some time. But over the course of the next several years, a lot happened. I wound up, because of my disability, becoming homeless for a few years, and following Star Citizen through that process. And it was one of those things that I was holding in front of myself. I'm going to get a gaming PC, and I'm going to get into this as soon as I can. And you need things to focus on to keep you moving forward. So I kind of put that in front of myself, and I kept reading all the bad press and all the comments about, it's a scam and this and that. I followed the whole dialogue about it. And at certain points I was disheartened, but looking through the news and seeing the stuff that the transparency that they were always trying to establish, not always effectively, but that they were constantly making the effort to establish with the player base. And I've worked in entertainment long enough to know the difference between somebody who's hiding from the audience versus somebody who is making a genuine effort to do something challenging that people don't necessarily understand the details of. And seeing that process come to where it is right now, and seeing Chris Roberts and his people having built a gaming company that's growing when so much of the game industry is contracting. What that has taught me is that the ethics, it's not just about the vision. It's not about being Elon Musk and like having an idea and cramming it down people's throats. It's about doing something for other people that they don't necessarily know is possible. And then building the effort to accomplish that goal on sustainable ethics, and making sure that you're constantly accountable to yourself and your audience and the vision of what you're trying to create. And in show business, it basically takes two things to succeed, right? It takes strength in your craft and strength in your community. Because if the house is always full and the show is always good, then there's no problems. And ultimately, you want to build that from the ground up. And seeing somebody in this market, in this work, in the media environment that we have, tackle the prospect of building an audience from scratch, and also building a craft that reflects their own aspirations. There's no question that this is the game that Chris always wanted to make, not just in the sense that he wanted to play it, but in the sense that he feels like these are the things that gaming should be doing and should have been doing for the last 10 years, and they haven't, for whatever reason, because of the realities of working for a publicly owned company and so on and so forth. The research and development that makes Star Citizen possible, I'm pretty sure in the minds of a lot of people who run the company, shouldn't have been the responsibility of CIG. It should have been stuff that was handled, procedurally, just naturally by the industry as part of the development of video games. And so watching them tackle the burden of catching up that tech debt and building all this stuff and coming to a place where they are making the game that they think their audience deserves, and their audience is learning how that game works, and everybody's constantly in a process of coming together around it, even when things are shaking the community apart. That, to me, is a very clear sign that you can do it right and you can do it well at the same time, and you don't necessarily need to embrace the this is how it's done.
We have a bit of a saying in my monastery that I call "design by gospel,"
Mm-hmm.
and it was I initially started using it right around when I was in a discussion regarding when this was when Castlevania Lords of Shadow had just come out,
Mm-hmm.
and one major critique I was seeing from critics and from some fans was that it was too linear, that it wasn't doing the Metroidvania approach a la Symphony of the Night, which I had said that was completely unfair because the developers, Mercury Steam, made crystal clear they had no interest in doing that model. Their point of inspiration
Yep.
was Super Castlevania 4. They outright said so. And I didn't
Yep.
think it was fair to hold it to a standard that it was never trying to meet to begin with.
There you
And
go.
when I asked why does it have to do that Metroidvania model, I never got a straight answer beyond expectations. And
Yeah.
I started using the term "design by gospel" to refer to that mindset of we do things a certain way because
Expectations
we've
of the
always
fan
done.
base. Yeah.
Sometimes it's
You're
not
right.
just fan base, but it's a case of doing things a certain way because we've always done things a certain way.
Yes.
I've been very critical of the state of things when it comes to sim racing for having misplaced priorities on that sort of approach, because that's what's always been done. Like I the notion of needing to go with such a level of simulation that it becomes this that it stops becoming a game.
Yeah.
And when it's to the point where sim racing fans are arguing with professional race car drivers, I think things have gone off the rails.
Yeah. Clearly.
Which I've seen. I remember seeing a clip from this one person who said the reason he quit playing iRacing competitively was he felt that it was becoming too I think he said it felt too much like NASCAR heat, which I found absolutely hilarious because it's like this at the end of the day it's a game, and trying to focus that much on realism to the detriment of everything else isn't going to, unless it results in a better game. It's a case of like, why do that?
And there's another part of it too, I think, which is that game development is a collaborative process, and this is something I have a lot of experience with film. But you owe it to the player or to the audience or whomever to use the people at your disposal. You find the best people to make not necessarily the game that you're trying to make, but to make the best game the game you're trying to make can be.
Yeah.
And there's a difference there. So, for example, my art director is a Brazilian artist named Federico Esteban. He's a magnificent artist, and he's got a passion for science fiction and a passion for design, and we connect on those levels. And at the same time, he's got influences that I don't have, and I had some pretty clear ideas about how things were going to look going into the relationship, and those ideas got pretty well shattered the moment I started receiving, and Federico heard what I had to say, and he integrated the things that I was asking for, but never in the way that I expected. And the truth is, it's more of its own game now. It's not hung up on Star Wars. It's not hung up on Starcom, and it's not anything other than Jump Rangers. So much more than it ever was before. And now Federico and I are building that new world in collaboration, using his interests, his fetishes, his sense of the world and everything else. And that's better. It's so much better than me. And part of the reason why I trust him with that is because I have some design training and I can communicate with him on that level, but I am not an art director on his level. I'm not. That's why I hired him. It's because he's better at the job than me, and trusting him to show me what he sees and not just prove that his ideas are superior, but just to like give him the freedom to define the game for himself. That's so important. And when you get into a game development process and you pull people in from all kinds of different directions, that's going to happen all the time. And if you're doing it right, the game you wind up with at the end of that process is not the game you thought it was going to be. It will be something better. It will be, because you're bringing in people who are amazing at what they do, and you're playing with them, and you are creating something new. But you know, for fans, it's a question of you can't. And this is so it's a hard part of the creative process to communicate, but it's just as true in directing as it is in game design.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't pretend to know what a performance is. I write the best script that I can. I give actors strong lines of actions to perform, and then they perform them better than I saw them on the page.
Yeah.
And the quality of the project multiplies until people aren't prepared for what they're getting. That's what you want.
No, even as collaborative as it can be, something I've stated is that at the end of the day, there needs to be one person who is the guy. Sometimes the guy is not a guy, but I use that as a shorthand for that one person who the buck stops with.
And that's true.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, what I would say is it is not that person's job to see the game in its entirety. It is that person's job to manage the creative process and also to decide what risks are beneficial to the project and which risks are not beneficial to the project. It is that person's job to make sure that everybody else is making the same game, number one, because that can go wrong. And number two, to make sure that the ultimate objectives of the project, whatever they happen to be, are constantly in sight and being worked toward. And as long as you're doing that, it is that person's responsibility, frankly, to say yes as much as possible. Like, you don't want to step on the creative process of the people that you're working with. You don't want them on rails. You want them as free as possible. And to be honest with you, that's not as much about micromanaging as it is about hiring the right people to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
It really is.
Yeah.
And if you hire those right people, and if you know that they understand the ultimate goal of the project to begin with, then like 60% of the job is done for you right there. Really. And from there, but the problem is, from the outside, if you're watching that development process and you start seeing production art or concept art or whatever, you start getting this preconceived idea of what this game is going to be when it's finished, then it's very hard to understand just how much that process can transform what you're going to get. It's unless you've worked through it, it seems like people are running off the rails. It's like, no, we're finding the rails. Don't you worry.
I've seen and gone through my fair share of experiences on both ends of it. And it's when it comes to the whole off the rails thing, I've watched documentaries on some of the more infamous productions over the years, including the insanity that was Heaven's Gate, or any time that Werner Herzog and Klaus Kinski were in the same room, which Kinski, there's a lot that can be said about Kinski, and a lot of it was said the most in Herzog's book called My Best Fiend.
Yeah.
Because even though they worked with each other 6 times over their careers, and both times they were coming to blows constantly.
Yeah.
Yep.
I actually, on the subject of like off the wall directors, I actually worked on Inland Empire, which was David Lynch's last movie, for about 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, as they say, a process of discovery. That was definitely a film where David did not have a clear idea of what he wanted, and the whole thing was for him about the exploration. And you know, in defense of anyone who criticizes that process, like, the movie cost $25 million for Studio Canal, and it never should have. It never should have.
Yeah.
There were expenses involved. It was 2 years of production.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've seen Inland Empire, it's probably pretty hard to believe that it took 2 years to make that movie because the production value isn't there, and all of those are fair critiques. I am not somebody who necessarily thinks you need to get lost in the process to find the show. I think that you can know what the show is going in, but what I'm saying is that the defining mechanisms of what that means, what that goal is, what that production is supposed to achieve, are probably a lot more either technical or esoteric than they appear from the outside. And it's not about the look of the film, and it's unless it is, but that's usually not indicative of a good film to begin with. It's not about it's going to be about some basic fundamental craft stuff at its core, and what you want to achieve in terms of the craft, and what everybody should be working towards in terms of the world building, and in terms of what the themes of the thing are, and that is a vision that is cogent, concise, loaded with room for people to work, and what story you're telling. Great, go tell that story, but there's going to be all kinds of different ways to do that, and that's where you let your DP run the camera department, you let your production designer run the design elements, and you just make sure that you've hired the right person, and also that they are doing work that empowers rather than hamstrings the people around them. And that management process, I think, is where sort of like you said, the big cheese lives.
Yeah. Yeah, I can certainly get that. Now, I know that Jump Rangers is in a state of alpha at this time, but
yeah,
what would be your plans for Jump Rangers over the next few months, or even the next year or so?
So for the next few months, I have a novel that I'm polishing. I'm rewriting. Let's not call it polishing. I'm rewriting a Jump Rangers novel that I would like to work towards publication, because I want the reach of the storytelling universe to be more than just the limited. I mean, indie TTRPGs are a hard sell, as you know.
Right.
So that's one thing. I have been publishing the text for Jump Rangers supplements now for about 2 years. I'm working on a really big one covering the entirety of the Saurian Horde, and it's about 150 pages deep right now. I want to finish that before the end of the year as well. So those are my end of the year goals, those two things. In terms of the next, let's say, 48 months, what I would like to see is, I have a producer that I'm working with, someone I know from film, who is very confident we can make a good showing of ourselves at Comic-Con and do a Kickstarter launch if we have the right materials. So my job is to put those materials together and empower that process and make sure that we get the money together for a publication. My art director and I have been working on concept design for Jump Rangers over the course of the last year. And there's a lot of stuff that's reaching a very polished state in terms of the design elements. We're going to start generating art and building out an art team to populate the core book. And the other thing that we need is a layout designer to help us design the actual core book. We're going to publish a paper core book. We're going to do an actual hard copy, beautiful, very nice. But I think overall, the idea for Jump Rangers is I want it to be accessible for kids, which means I should put it on phones and iPads and computers. I want it to be. If kids aren't keeping libraries, I don't want to make them get a bookshelf. I want to make sure that this is where they are. And I think that that's probably really smart in terms of publishing supplementary material, because as we know, any tabletop role-playing game is a diminishing returns curve. Everything you publish at a certain point is reaching finer and finer levels of detail, and the appeal of any given publication is going to be a little bit less than the publications you've already done, because you've already sort of covered the broad strokes, right? Now you're getting into the nitty-gritty, right? You did what are vampires, now you're doing what is the Sabbat, right? And it gets more detailed from there. So what I would like to do is create a subscription service that empowers the game to keep on trucking and just keep publishing material that people are interested in, and make sure that the subscription is justified by the new material that's getting released, and that can be artwork and game mechanics and everything else, and it all gets piled into some kind of publication database, which, as you said, needs to be very heavily indexed. I don't deny that. Absolutely do not deny that. And that's kind of where I would. So I think in the short term, get the novel finished, get this next text finished, keep coming up with new design material. We need to get some nice key art done, and Federico's working on that now. The next step is preparing the Kickstarter. And then the next step after that is publishing the core book as a physical object. And we'll see if there's demand for other publications. Fantastic if there is. I would love, obviously. I love books. I'm a reader. But I want to make sure that I create a sustainable model for publishing this game that reaches the audience in the intended way. And the other nice thing about having an app is that we can include tools. As I don't know necessarily how much we can streamline the process of GMing this game, and I would need to hire an engineer to tell me some of those things. But gee, wouldn't it be nice? It's certainly die rollers and those kinds of things should be very early in the process, but who knows how far this app can go and what we can really achieve with it. I would like to create something that takes on a life of its own, so we can start exploring that stuff. And then, I've got people I know in the comics world. I think it's very obvious that we should be doing Jump Rangers comics, and we'll see where we can get from there.
Yeah, I can get that. With that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way to my temple and enjoy the madness that happens here.
It's been a pleasure. I appreciate you taking the time to talk the game through. Does anybody in chat have any last minute questions or anything like that? There's only a couple people out there right now. But if anybody's got any questions, please ask, or you can find me at I'm Tennyson Stead on Blue Sky and Instagram. You can find Jump Rangers on Blue Sky and Instagram, and I'm on Mastodon as well. And I'm always checking the Coffee page, coffee.com/Jump Rangers. If you send me a message there, I will get back to you. And the game is available for download for free. You can play the core book off of the Coffee page, and there's also the data deck, which is a compendium of everything that has been done for the game. So a subscription gets you access to all the supplementary material, but you can see what is in that supplementary material with the data deck if you want to check it out.
And
do you have any questions, Bildra? Any?
Yeah, I think that about covers everything I wanted to dip into. But
thank you so much. It's been a pleasure meeting you. It's nice. It's nice to talk. It's been a week. Nice to talk about some nerdy stuff. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.
遅い上洛が上長年関税を往年関税を年々重心期年々不利し関税をラーメン